This is ACOFAE. Laura Marie and Jessica Marie proudly present A Court of Fandoms and Exploration, a podcast. Fair warning, everything the hosts say is explicit, full of spoilers and adult content and shall not be used against them. They have opinions. Let's try not to drag anyone for expressing themselves and just have fun for an hour. We all deserve it.
This episode contains spoilers from Book Lovers and Babel. There are also mentions of Shadowhunters, House of the Dragon, ACOTAR, Crescent City, Dune, and the Oleander Sword. For full list, please see show notes.
Everybody, and welcome to A Court of Fandoms and Exploration, your weekly deep dive into the YA literature and fandoms that we love. I am Laura Marie.
And I'm Jessica Marie.
And today is a very special episode. Today is our annual Thankful episode. And this year we have changed the format just a little bit.
So this year we decided to kind of share a little bit more about what we both like outside of what we always talk about on the podcast. I mean, y'all already know that we have our video game episode with Laura. We talk about the cons. We've gone through like different themes, like with our villain episodes. But this year we wanted to talk about books that we are thankful for that we read this year and came out this year. That we wouldn't necessarily talk about the podcast. Laura's background, where she loves political intrigue, she loves, strategy, and what got me back into reading was contemporary romance. So we figured we would probably pull from those two genres and discuss about both those books a little bit more.
I'm very, very excited. I will be talking about Babel by R.F. Kuang. And I don't know anything really about the book that Jess is going to be talking about. And Jess is going to be speaking first. So Jess, please tell us about the book that has made such an impact on you this year.
So the book that I'm going to be discussing, I was going to say we, but you don't know anything about this.
No, I don't know anything about it. I'm so excited.
Is Book Lovers by Emily Henry.
Stop. Really?
Yeah. And believe me, I am just as shocked too, because admittedly, my first Emily Henry book that I had read was People We Meet on Vacation or something, and I was not a fan. I know I'm going to get people are going to be like, oh my God, what? I cried at the end of that book, but because I was thank God it's over. I was so overwhelmed that I just did not like it. And it actually wound up being a friends to lovers book. And that was I was that solidified that I cannot try to push through a friends to lovers situation anymore. Cause I was finally, thank God. It was one of the, but this one hit a little bit differently. I know your book, Laura, all I knew is that people talked about it on Book Talk, and that was it. Nobody gave anything really away. I mean, there was some discourse, I understand, but I'm sure you'll explain that later in the episode. But did you know anything about, or at least knew the cover from any of the social platforms of the book that I'm going to talk about?
Yes, I've seen the cover. It's one of those colorful kind of cartoony covers. Yeah. Okay. So, all right. Yeah. I am aware. Yes.
Okay.
I could pick it out in a bookstore.
Yeah.
Is it peach?
No, it's blue. I think we were outside of one of your used bookstores, in Denver or something. And you were you might as well grab it. People are talking about it somewhere. You're going to read it eventually. Get it while you can. So I have the hard copy but I usually like contemporary romance in an audio version. So I had rented it from the library and I read it in the library first. And then there were quotes and moments in the book that I was ooh, I really want to do a reread of this book and highlight it and stuff. So here we are. Now, reading it the first time, I wasn't expecting that we'd be talking about it ever.
What? Okay. So you said that you read another one of her books and that you weren't super into it. Was there any kind of that feeling in this book? Okay. what makes this book so yum when the other was so yuck?
In our conversations that we've had, where we've read fantasy books, and there are certain fantasy books that we said, it was the first time that we saw ourselves in a character. It was the first time that I saw myself in a contemporary character, not physical appearance by any means. I mean, she's still like blonde hair, 5'11", like gorgeous model, but personality of, she was a workaholic. Work was a priority for her. Taking care of the people she cares about is a priority for her. And she lost, she had relationships that didn't tether, that didn't work out. But she was never shamed for of it. And I think we've had this discussion, and I've definitely had it with one of my other friends, where like any contemporary romance, you have a happily ever after. That's part of the formula. But it's just like the Hallmark and Lifetime Christmas movies. They're going to get together in the end, but it's everybody always goes to the small town. And spoiler, they don't end up in the small town. They end up right in New York. She's in, for this character, she's in the publishing industry. But it was like she wasn't blasted. She was appreciated for being who she was and didn't make any apologies for it. And it took a while for her to get there.
That's awesome.
And then there's also like a female friendship in it, which usually it isn't the case with, I feel like, a lot of like contemporary romances, or at least the ones that I've read. But she has an actual sister. They have an actual like that sisterly bond where they're friends. They're, like the ones that you always read about. And like, yeah, there's a miscommunication trope, but it wasn't even between her and the love interest. It was between the sisters where they just had to talk it out. I just like the things that we like, sisterhood, communication, importance of like seeing the bigger picture. Like there's even a point in this book where they just like her and the love interest, the main character and the love interest, they realize that they're like, we're going to just embrace the time that we have together, because we know the two worst times in our lives were these long-term relationships, and they didn't work out for us. We can't put that expectation on us either. And then he's still like, I just like a guy who simps, and he at the end, he gave it all up, and he was like, fuck it. Like, no, I'm giving up everything and I'll come back to the city, because he was from the city too. But he was like family obligations and all that stuff where he felt like tethered. So I think it's just like everything that I was like, that's ideal.
So like this kind of flipped everything a little bit, right? So it's like you go to the big city, the guy compromises, the guy comes back, like there's the sisterhood. So I mean, it sounds really good.
It was the first time that I think I read a book. I mean, I told you earlier, I would never pitch you a contemporary romance. I would never put that on you. I know this isn't your genre, but it was the first time that I read the book where I thought, you know what, Laura would approve of this one. Like out of all of them, she'd be okay with this. These two wind up working together just because she's an agent, he's an editor, and she winds up, publishing is a very big industry if people are familiar with it. So there's a lot of hand-in-hand and working relationships. And there's very much a separation of church and state. When they're working, they're able to work together, but they can still have that banter. And then when they put the working aside, when they can put the working aside, because they're both like extreme workaholics, they're just like a power couple in the sense that they're just really a formative pair, and understand and respect, I think, is a big thing, of each other's, working relationship and like their professional relationship, and that they can step away from it when they're not working too.
I can see exactly why you like it. You said that you went through and you highlighted some quotes. Like, hit me with some of these.
I don't know. I don't think we have time. I think most of the quotes that I highlighted were just how they pertained to myself. I'm like, oh, that's something I said. Or even like there's a conversation the two of the sisters have, and basically the two sisters, parental death trigger warning, the sister dies, the older sister takes care of the younger sister when they're like in their teens. So you can't tell me that the main character isn't at least a Capricorn sun, but there's definitely at least one or two Capricorns in her big three. because the sister, the main character was like, I wanted to help. I wanted to take care of you. And the sister says, I know you always do, and I love you for that, but I don't want you to be mom, and I definitely don't want you to be my dad. When I tell you something's going on, sometimes I just want you to be my sister and say, that sucks, instead of trying to fix it. And, it continues on, and she goes, and the sister says, like, it's hard for me. I hate feeling like I can't protect you and I can't fix the situation. And I think we talk about sisterhood so much here on the podcast, where whether you're blood sisters or like family that you've chosen, it was such a moment where I think we naturally want to be fixers and we want to be there for each other. And the sister, like the communication, she's like, I get it. And you feel powerless when you can't do something, but sometimes I don't need you to do anything. You have to agree with me. And then, they continue to talk it out, and she eventually says, fine, I'll say that sucks, but I'm still gonna, if you said that she found out like her B12 and her iron, she was like iron deficient. She's like, I'll say it sucks, but you'll still find something in the mail with like a vitamin care package, which if whoever's listening, if they know me, like that's 100% something that I would do. I'd be like, oh, that sucks. Next thing you know, there's something in the mail from Amazon. So I just thought like her as a person was really relatable. And just growing through, like working through it. And I thought it was really nice. It was refreshing that it wasn't the workaholic is the bad guy. And there wasn't this negative connotation, although it might have started off that way of how it was positioned, that it's okay to be who you are. It's okay to love work. And even the guy says, he's like, you love work because you're passionate about it. You love what you do. Of course you're a workaholic. We work in this industry. Like forget what everybody else is. The only people who are going to get it are the people who are in it with you.
So you told me that you did this through audio, right? And then you went back and you got a copy of it.
Yeah, I did the whole we are not casual fans thing. I had the hard copy. The audio version was available at the library, so I read that first, got the used copy at the bookstore, and then when I was rereading it for the podcast, I got it on ebook so I can just highlight it better.
And do you think, this is just a question from my own curiosity, if you had not read this with the audio, do you think you would have liked it so much the first time to read it a second time?
No, because it's Julia Whelan. She narrated this book, and she does so many wonderful things. But I love her for contemporary romance, and we've read her for like the podcast too, and I can completely differentiate her in contemporary romance from like the fantasy stuff that she does that we read.
Oh, that's great. It's such a nice shout out to Julia Whelan too. She narrates the Black Witch Chronicles.
You read your Babel through audio too, because you even made like a TikTok about like people are sleeping on the audio.
Oh gosh. Yes, but I still want to talk about your book. I still want to talk about your book.
I'm like trying. I'm like, this is weird. I've never done the interview thing.
I still want to talk about your book. So what did this kind of bring up for you that is different than a book that we would usually read for the podcast, right? Was there like a different emotion that kind of came out of you?
No, I just think it's the genre. Like we really don't cover contemporary romance in the podcast, which I'm fine with because it's pushed me outside of my comfort zone and realizing that there's so many other things. I don't want to say better things because everybody has their own preferred genre. But like to expand, you've helped me with baby steps too, where I'm like, oh my gosh, this seems so overwhelming. And then we'll do like Throne of Glass and then Priory. And then we just finished watching House of the Dragon and I'm like in it. And you're like, okay, well, this is the next step of like what we're going to do, till we get to this other thing. Or even when you had brought, the Shadowhunter Chronicles, that could be overwhelming. If I try to tell, I can't even pitch. I need you to pitch it for people who want to go into fantasy, because if I try to say, oh, I've been sobbing all weekend. I actually did with our friend of the podcast, Rachel. I was like, I want to call you, but we have to record and I'm finishing this book and I've been crying all day. And she's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I don't want you to cry. I go, no, you don't understand. Like this series has like 22 books in it right now. So to try to not have people intimidated by some of the stuff. And you've guided through, not just me, but I'm sure many listeners too, who've been like, oh, this doesn't seem as like daunting as I might have thought when you have to like, when you take little bites of it. I mean, even for the Shadowhunter Chronicles, we took like almost a full year off before we came back to do the Dark Artifices, aside from like the emotional trauma that the Infernal Devices causes.
That's true. And I think that's a good segue over to mine, because Babel, I'm going to start with this. Babel is not an easy book to just read a physical copy of or an ebook copy of. I have not really been a part of the conversation about Babel. I have been on the fringes of it, but I have read it now twice. And the second time was just this week. And this is a book that I am just like so proud to admit that if I did not have the audio, I would hate this book. The audio makes it. There are a few different narrators, but there's two main ones, and I have to point them out. They're just like so absolutely fantastic. The first one is Chris Lee Kumhoy. I know I said that wrong. Please look him up. And Billy Fulford Brown. She is one of the narrators from All of Us Villains and All of Our Demise. Okay. She does like Isabel McCaslin. That's her. So that was her. So Babel, I'm just going to tell you a basic plot, and I'm going to tell you like why. Okay, so Babel presents, and I believe was marketed as like a dark academia situation. It is a dark academia situation, but not the way that you think. It is a critique of the British Empire and colonization. Straight on. And you see it through the eyes of Robin, who is Cantonese. He's born in China, and he's half Chinese. And we see everything through his eyes. Okay. So that's the premise. Okay. I love this book because I read this before I went to Oxford, and it's set in Oxford. The way that this book, because it's dark academia, and Babel, we know, is like the tower of languages. This is all about languages. It reads like a textbook in some places because there are 4 students that we follow, and we follow them like through their life at Oxford, and they're taking language classes with the goal of like doing, I'm going to say magic in quotes, being the end goal, because the empire is running on like a low level kind of magic. Okay. But the male narrator and the female narrator switch off when the language explanations start to go. So a conversation will start in English, and then it'll go to Chinese, and then French, and then it'll go to Creole, and then all of these different languages. And I imagine the way that the book is that there would be like footnotes because the narrators switch off. So it would be like a conversation, and then something would be mentioned about the king. It'd be like the king's law. And then the female narrator will come in, and there'll be like a paragraph long explanation about that law and how it kind of fits into the story. And then it goes back to the male narrator, and it continues on as if that passage was not read.
So I was going to say, it's like if you were watching a movie and the movie was paused, and then the character breaks the fourth wall to give an explanation, and also then the character reverts back into position and the movie's unpaused. Okay.
Or if you were watching on like Prime, Amazon, right, and you paused it and it has all those facts on the side, it would be kind of like that.
Okay.
Right?
Interesting.
But
does it take you out of the book?
No, because in the audio, well, here's the thing. In the audio, it is flawless. It keeps you interested. There's different tones. the reason why I'm presenting this book to the podcast and to you. Hello. I'm presenting this to you because I was actually like learning things as I was going because like, oh, it's fiction, like whatever. But like the language is language. And like some of it is like, but some of it is like, oh, that's really interesting. Well, I could look that up. I can do my own research on that. Like,
did you find yourself stopping to read? How sometimes we have to put the book down for a second, take like an emotional pause. Did you find yourself putting the book down because you're like, wait, I want to look this up again?
Yes. Especially after I went to Oxford and I pinpointed, like I went to where like Babel would have been and I went to the like different landmarks and stuff.
Oh, cool.
And the author has like a little foreword, like a little note being like, yeah, it wasn't accurate, but like when I was there, like I really liked these places, so I threw these places in there too, and like I warped time a little bit so I could include all of this stuff, and like you can like go to some of that stuff, and of course this book is sold out in Oxford. You cannot touch it. Like
you tried so hard. That was on your like list to do when you went over there too.
Oh, I was so annoyed. It was so hard. Okay, but. The reason that I didn't really present this to the podcast, even though this is like a fantasy, dark academia kind of situation, is that it is just really dense and it is really heavy, and it would have to be done, I think, through the audio so that you could really appreciate it. But also there's like female betrayal in here, and that's not something that we really love at all. And this is like a standalone as far as I am aware. And there's just there's so much other. But personally to me, because we can be so many things and we are all multifaceted, this really called to me. And there's a theme that I wanted to talk about at the very end. So if you haven't read Babel, I highly suggest that you do. The critique of the British Empire is basically that the empire runs on stolen goods and stolen people. And they do a lot to facilitate, the exchange of, people and goods. And that if the foreign people that they have brought in to work, like to service and like labor for them, stop working, then the empire will fall, right? In theory. Mm-hmm. So, Robin, our main character, is this. I mean, spoilers, but Robin is Chinese. He's Chinese, and he's born in Canton. And his father is Professor Lovell, who is a professor at Babel. That professor has gone out several times and impregnated Chinese women, and then left those pregnant women with English nannies and a supply of books and instructions that child be raised in dual language. And then at a predetermined time, Professor Lovell goes and extracts those children and then raises them as his ward so that they speak and dream in their native language, but also know English. And then they are trained in other languages so that they are important to the British Empire. And these children are then instilled with British values and then continue to advocate for the empire. But like they are victims.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that is the thing. And so we, the reader, realize this crime that has been committed slowly as Robin realizes what has happened. And he also realizes that this has been done before because he has an older brother, Griffin, who he meets that has he's in a secret society, whatever. He's trying to like bring down Babel because he sees like the empire needs to stop because they're continuing to take over the world and it's wrong, right? Like it's crime. So it's just this whole situation. But these students outpace the master. The students kill Professor Lovell, hide it, throw a revolution, right? They have a revolution.
We love a revolution. Or I think. I don't know.
Yes.
now.
No. Well, yes. They start a revolution, and then they successfully bring down the Tower of Babel. And then there are two people that escape. Vitois escapes and someone else, but and Letty did, and Rami. Okay, but Robin dies in the tower, and it takes like 4 people to bring the tower down.
The main character dies?
Yeah, the main character dies.
What? In the
like
first book?
Yeah, in the second to last chapter, the main character dies. Spoiler.
Wow.
But Robin has a whole section where he is waiting to die because like they're all separate and they're all gonna like set off the silver at the same time. You have to be there to like say the words, and they're all gonna do it at the same time. The clock is counting down, and that is the theme that we have, and that's a theme that we have not talked about on the podcast, that we have talked about in real life. The theme of waiting to die and living with that. And I find that Robin has some very beautiful lines here. He's like, what do I do? I need to like think of anything else but this. But then the clock is ticking down, and like all I can think about is like how loud the clock is, and like I don't want to die, but I have to do this. Like all of that. It's just a lot. And then he does it. He does it, and then he describes like the feeling of everything, and he hears the other explosions. So like everybody did it. He knows the tower is coming down. He knows he's going to bring down Empire. It's just like, it's very moving in the same way. And here's my transition. It's very moving in the same way that Addie LaRue is very moving in this instance. But Babel, and I said earlier in the beginning to kind of close this circle that I kind of stayed on the fringes of the discourse about Babel. And that is like kind of because I really loved it. And I didn't want to taint any of it with kind of anybody else's opinion. And I felt that way about Addie LaRue too, because I really enjoyed that. And people really disliked that for being slow and for being just kind of unrealistic and boring.
Which one, Addie LaRue or Babel?
Both.
Really?
Absolutely both. And that is why, and I'm like, look at me closing all my loops. That is also why I do feel that the audio is 1,000% necessary here. And that if you just had the book, and the book is beautiful. I tracked down like a UK first edition signed copy. Like I am all about it. But like the audio is superior here. And just because you experience something with the audio, that is reading. So like,
we have a whole episode about we did like the research.
That. Yeah, like it's a whole situation. But I have pitched this book to other people, and it is a weird thing to pitch. Yeah.
I remember when we were talking about it, you had mentioned to me, I go, oh, should we read it for the pod? And you said, maybe not necessarily the pod. And I had asked why. And the first thing you said, well, there's female betrayal. And I was like, oh, that's not up our alley. But however, you did say, but you should read it. That, and Laura can sell me anything. So I'll be like, okay. So at some point I'll read Babel, but I know I would have to read it through the audio version. I mean, and now that you're saying things about like slower, some criticisms with quote unquote slower books, the same thing could be said about the Oleander Sword. We loved the Oleander. You have to have that in a reading, like an audio experience, I think. Same thing with Dune. We did audio. That was wonderful. If you're able to do the audio experience, because then, completely acknowledging that not everybody has, access to audio or can be part of the audio experience. That's so interesting that it's just like for you, you're like, no, like this, it kept you interested.
Also, and this is a credit to the male narrator or narrators in Babel. The accents are perfect. There is no stumbling or like weirdness over any of the languages or accents, at least to my like very amateur, untrained ear. It was flawless. It was wonderful. The Latin all of it, because and this is a problem. This is a criticism that I have had of classical literature for a long time. And this is just my personal opinion. It's the reason I don't really like Mark Twain, is that colloquial speech, when it's written, is difficult for my eye to like comprehend and read.
Oh, Mark Twain is like, I completely blanked that out. It really is. It takes you forever to read Huck Finn.
As well as like freaking commas and
everything.
And it's so hard for me to read. So I know that if I were to just pick up Babel and read it, my eye would skip over all of that, because what the fuck does any of that have anything to do with me? I don't know what it means. But in the audio, not only are you forced to hear it, but you're also hearing it, and then you're hearing like the explanation of it, which is just 1,000 times better. And I just really, really love that. Also, if anyone is really interested in the audio of this book, the way that the male narrator has his like cadence and rhythm is very similar to Stephen Fry in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is just the most wonderful movie in the world. Which, what I mean by that is that it kind of gives it a slight joyful whimsicalness to even like the most, I'm going to say like graphic moments, because there's like abuse. Even those moments, you kind of feel like you're seeing it through Robin's rose-colored glasses, because that's actually saying it out loud. That's exactly what you are. But the narrator kind of gives it that like English bounciness to it. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
And it is like kind of joyful in parts. And again, it's pleasing to the ear, and it's just another compliment to the production of this book. Really lovely.
And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the author of Babel is the same author of The Poppy Wars. You're on record on the podcast saying that you read The Poppy Wars. However, there were some like violent descriptions of like war scenes specifically that you typically would just like gloss over if you were physically reading the book. If you're listening to the book, you fast forward through it too. Did you find those type of scenes in this book as well? Or do you feel like there was more of the focus of the dark academia and really kind of like everything else that you were explaining? I mean, that's pretty dark and gruesome enough, but but I just didn't know if there was like an additional level that you found that you had to like take a step back from the things you read in this book.
No, there's no like graphic war crimes. I mean, obviously the Poppy War, a lot of people really love The Poppy War. The Poppy War is objectively very good, that series. It is not for me. It is too graphic. It is not the reason why I read those descriptions of war. Here, it's almost like she took all of the like descriptions of war that she had in the Poppy War series, and then just took all of that and changed it into British Empire history and stuff, and then like made a book around that. It is just really, really, really wonderful. And I do want to stress, like, the dark academia was the sell. It was the hook, mm-hmm. It isn't really that. It isn't really, because like the premise is that like silver kind of can like, if you put language on silver, it's like kind of conductive and has a reaction, and that reaction you can like hone and make it like do things. It's like boats go faster, iron doesn't decay, infections get healed, stuff like that. And England has become reliant upon that. So like that is really the only dark academia part of it, with like the magic. The rest of it is purely corrupt academics. Like, I think that's the difference. Cause like, yes, it is dark academia, but like politically it's awful. But like the magic system is like, it is,
So you said that you had been pitching it to other people to like, you should read this. has it been an easy pitch? Has it been difficult? And if it has been difficult, why do you think it's a hard sell? Because at least when we used to get, me into fantasy, you're like, look, Fae is a hard sell because we've had Tinkerbell indoctrinated into our heads since we were children. And Thumbelina too, now that I think about it. So do you feel like if it is difficult, why do you think that is?
I think it's less difficult to pitch than a contemporary romance.
Oh,
I mean that.
I believe that. I feel like Babel, how can I say this? In 2021, I had read over 100 books. Maybe 5 of them were contemporary romance. This year, I found a balance because we've kind of just like had heavier topics in some of the fantasy that we read. And I was like, I needed something a little bit with a little bit more levity. That being said, contemporary romance typically has a very skewed, specific demographic, where Babel, I feel like you can hit a broader audience.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking too. And also, there are keywords that you can say with Babel that will get people interested. And when you're pitching a contemporary romance, those keywords are a little bit more like limited and specialized, right?
Right.
So, yeah. And isn't that gross?
Everything about isn't that part of the conversation that happens on any social platforms in a book community?
Because I'm thinking about it. I pitched this to some male family members and they were like, oh yeah, that sounds great. That sounds amazing. Like, oh my gosh, really? Tell me more. Tell me more, please. Tell me more. And I was like, well, there's magic. And they were like, but like, is it a big deal? And I was like, nah, but they don't like, nah.
Sometimes I feel like you can't say magic to certain people because that automatic, like, I think
like
there's, yeah, because I do think, and maybe we even talked about it in our intro episode many, many moons ago, where I was brought up with a certain, like, you can't do that because this is the image and that you project onto yourself, which is a reflection of the family and blah, blah, blah. So I didn't really get to, till, COVID happened, where we're finally like, let's embrace our childhood selves and start, healing some of our childhood trauma too while we're at it. You kind of have to like, well, here's this book about the British society, British Empire. And certain family members, I'm sure you can't talk about like, oh, and here's what they did.
Yeah.
You have to just let them come to those conclusions on their own.
That's the thing. So you were asking me like, how did it go? I don't know. I have had no follow-up. No follow-up. No one has like said anything. No one's reached out. No one said like they have read it. But like, that's typical, right? Like, that's very typical. But these people did seem very, very interested. And when I was talking about, so I actively chose to speak about Babel. I actively chose to not speak about the fairy porn. I made a conscious decision on that based on the environment. And this is another like conversation. I made that decision based on the environment that I was in, the image I wanted to project, and the amount of respect I wanted those people to have for me when I left, right? Because Babel is like just hefty enough and like she's thick if you pick her up that you're like, oh, okay. All right, let's see what this is about. All right, maybe she wasn't just talking at like maybe this really is something. So I actively made that choice instead of being like, okay, let's talk about Throne of Glass. Let's talk about ACOTAR. Let's talk about like, yeah.
Even though those have such strong themes in them and great thought-provoking conversation, it's so interesting that we have to have those, that we're so mindful about the people who we're, I don't want to say surrounding ourselves with, because in certain familial situations you might not get to pick and choose those situations, but it's like, what's going to appeal to the audience who is around me in this moment?
This is actually kind of another full circle moment for us. I think in our first episode ever, I talked about how I had to do the icebreaker in New Jersey.
I was thinking about this too. I didn't know if you wanted to talk about it.
Yeah, I had to do the icebreaker in New Jersey. And like, we had to go around in a circle and like say what we were reading. And there's actually like two things about this. And my boss said 50 Shades of Grey, and everyone like stopped what they were doing and they were like, yes, go off. Yes, amazing. Yes, absolutely. I was dying. I was absolutely dying. In a professional setting, these people have like power over me. There were other people there. It was just the most awkward situation I could possibly be in. It's like, obviously I lied and said I was reading something different. That same company, I'm going to say, that I worked for, in the interview process for one of my like promotions, they asked me what book I was reading. I absolutely lied out of my ass. And I said that I was reading The Hobbit because like, I was not going to say what I was reading because again, these were like, older women who are, you know, I'm going to say Karen, but like, it's a little
not
bit more
necessarily open to conversations outside of the traditional classics.
Yeah. It's just like,
you don't read classics. I can tell.
But honestly, also too, you read classics. So you have to have like a happy kind of medium. And there's like movies about Lord of the Rings. So like that was a very safe answer. And I hate that we have to have kind of a safe answer. Like that's shitty. But I also don't want to say that I'm like, want to shame people for reading books. That's not the case, but it's like, it's the ick. It's the ick.
No, I don't think the conversation is about like what books you read. I think it's the bigger conversation of there are other people who, outside of the book community who aren't as tolerant and want to have these conversations. I mean, you and I and everybody in the book community who's like, oh, tell me more about this orc story that you're reading, this orc erotica. I've never read orc erotica in my life, but please tell me why it appeals to you because there's something about it. Same thing when Ice Planet Barbarians came out. Like there is a conversation to be had, but that's because we are in a very niche community that wants to, and who is, you know, most of the times can be respectful of each other, and have those conversations. And you know, you get reality kind of sets in when you go outside of that zone. Because I remember I was telling somebody I was reading Throne of Glass from work in like early 2021, and they were like, "What?" And I remember I had to pivot it and pitch it like, oh, it's kind of like a book version of Game of Thrones. There's a lot of strategy. I didn't bring up Fae. I didn't bring up shifters. I didn't bring up magic at all. But I had to I realized my surroundings really quick and had to change the conversation. Now I had somebody at work the other day. She's like, I'm at the end of Silver Flames. I was like, double take at the after party. I was like, what is happening?
But that is a thing. You also have to like know your audience, and that also goes to like your, you know, professionalism and like judgment and like bosses being all of that stuff, workplace behavior, all that stuff. And also, I was out socially, which you know I hate, and I was talking to somebody. And they were like, oh, what do you do? And I like said in passing, and they were like, oh, cool. Like, like, da-da-da. And then I started talking about books, and they mentioned that they were like kind of maybe in the same affiliated field as I was. And I put the brakes on it immediately, because as much as we want to be like, you know, share everything, like, you know, I'm reading this, be proud, whatever. There is like a professional line where it's like, yeah, I can get hired then though, you know? So I'm just gonna like, no, we're not talking about this. And that, we're talking about being in our bubble and being safe is such a shitty thing to realize when you have to pump the brakes and you're just like, this thing that I really love that is like not an issue, right? But like, if you go and you Google it and you see something that you don't like, you're going to make it like this big thing. and it's going to just be a problem for everybody. And who wants that?
Yeah. And I mean, we're talking specifically about the fields that we're in. I mean, that's great if people have their, are able to have those freedom, your personal relation, you're able to do your personal relationships and your professional relationships overlap. But we also acknowledge that that's not all the case. We also have a friend who is in a very top tier profession. There's no way that she would be able to be like, I just finished Tower of Dawn. Can you? I mean, she goes to our group chat, but she can't. She can't go to work and talk about that.
No. And what a shame, though. And I think that's kind of the point, right? Because we should not have to worry about this. We as women, I guess you and I have to deal with so much shit. It's just so shitty and so hard, and it's just why this other little thing. But that's why we have the podcast.
I was going to say, I was like, what a perfect way, because I was going to say but that's why we're thankful. We have this community to be thankful for, that we have, people we can talk about our shared interests, these things that we love. We could have this, even today is a perfect example. We talked about 2 different books that we were both reading. And this is the first time we've done this too. We usually just, we have our books that we read for the podcast, and then we have books that we read on top of that during the week. But this was the first time where we're able to kind of meld them together and feel okay, would we talk about them on the podcast? Why or why not? And then kind of cherry pick and how everything kind of loops together. So we're thankful for that. We're thankful for the community for this.
I am incredibly thankful that you were able to share book lovers with us. That is a discussion that we have just not have. I am just so excited that you had this reaction to it, that we're able to share, and that we're able to bring just a little bit of contemporary romance on the podcast. I
know. Usually I just even with my Goodreads, I think it's safe to say, we all know I'm a reactive reader. And sometimes once I give it a day, I'm like, wait, did I really have a 5-star reaction? Or was I just think about it, Jess? But this one, I reread it and I was like, no, it's still just as good as I remember it. The sisterhood parts hit harder, and the professional parts hit harder the second read, just because of stuff that's going on in my personal life too. So it was just no, it's just as good. And my Goodreads ratings, I try not to do stars anymore, because I just want it to be just, here's my review. But this one I went here's my review and here's your 5 stars. I didn't even second guess it.
That is so great. I am so stoked. I don't know. That just made me very happy. I am very thankful that you were comfortable enough to share all of that with us. That is just so nice.
No, I'm glad that we got to talk about Babel more, because you wouldn't even, fun fact for we usually kind of regroup right before the podcast. Laura wouldn't do that. She was like, nope, you're getting everything what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell it on the podcast. So I'm so excited that, thank you for sharing. Now it'll just move up more on my TBR. Next time I throw something out, when I'm not in a book slump, which we're back from, so we're good.
Yes. And again, I'm sorry if I was rambling a little. Here's just a visual. My notes were
I like it. Well, you showed me the notes. I was going to say, you showed me your notes. It's half a page. It's 6 words maybe. And you're here are my notes. I go, what?
Yeah, I told Jess it was mostly going to be vibes. So thank you. Thank you for letting me just vibe out about that book. I really appreciate it. We are all thankful today.
Thanks for joining us. Feel free to follow us on ACOFAE Podcast on Instagram at ACOFAE Podcast. We're also both on TikTok, ACOFAE Laura and ACOFAE Jessica. And if you should feel so kind to leave us a 5-star review on any of your listening platforms, we would be extremely thankful. Talk to y'all soon, and thanks for joining us. Bye.
Bye.